Hello, everybody. My name is Gabriela Ortega Ricketts. I use she, her pronouns, and I am IDA's Manager of Artist Programs. I'm speaking today from the Los Feliz, Thai-town neighborhood of Los Angeles, which is originally belonging to and still inhabited and cared for by the Gabrielino Tongva people. I am a white woman with a brown bob and bangs. I'm wearing a red and black Polaroid fleece. And I have a white wall behind me. Before we start, I would like to thank our access providers, Maggie and Darcy, our ASL interpreters, and Heidi, our CART captioner. Thank you so much for being here and working this event with us. We are so excited that you're here, and we deeply appreciate the diverse global membership and all of our participants who come to this event. As you can see, we have people from Florida, we have people from Berlin here, from Los Angeles, from everywhere, and it's really cool to see everyone coming together. I also have a few announcements about some of our upcoming events. We are currently holding open calls for our DocuClub work in progress screening series. If you're unfamiliar with DocuClub, we screen works in progress, rough cuts, fine cuts of up to 90 minutes for public audience. And then those screenings are followed by feedback sessions where filmmakers can get feedback from the audience, basically. And it's really cool, supportive, great events. If you want to learn more or apply, you can check out documentary.org/docuclub. And if you have any questions, please email docuclub@documentary.org. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. We are recording this presentation, or the presentation part of the workshop. We will stop recording for the Q&A portion. The recording will be posted online, as will the chat from the event. Please put your questions in the chat. We'll be accumulating them throughout the presentation. We will also be answering questions after the presentation and posting those online. I mean, questions that weren't answered, we will be writing up answers and posting those online. And now I'm thrilled to introduce producer extraordinaire and the Vice President of Nonfiction at Louverture Films, Maya E. Rudolph. Maya is a talented and experienced producer and post-production supervisor who has worked on a wide range of projects, from Shirkers and The Last Black Man in San Francisco to the Andy Warhol Diaries, and to most recently the Tuba Thieves, which premiered at Sundance this past January. I had the pleasure of working with Maya on the Andy Warhol Diaries, and let me tell you, not only is she incredibly good at her job, but she's also kind, easygoing, encouraging, and insightful, just really a dream. Maya, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and experience with us. We're so happy to have you here.
Thank you so much, Gabriela. That was a lovely introduction. And thank you so much to you and Abby for inviting me to this event. Thank you to the access providers. And good morning or good evening, wherever you are. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to this workshop about post-production. Post-production is a vast topic, but we are going to try to get through as much as possible and talk about sort of what are some common myths around post-production that can make it seem a little unapproachable or intimidating. And then we'll also talk through a lot of the nuts and bolts of a post-production workflow and what that might look like for different projects. So let's get into it. First slide, please. All right. Well, some of this information you already know, but hello, I'm Maya E. Rudolph. I'm the Vice President of Nonfiction at Louverture Films, where I work with an amazing team. We produce nonfiction and fiction films and series and much more. And a lot of my background is in post. We will get to that in a second. I use she, her pronouns. I am a white woman with glasses and dark hair, wearing a black button-down shirt, sitting in an office in Los Angeles in front of a bookshelf. So once again, thank you so much to IDA for inviting me to conduct this workshop. I got a lot of really great questions in advance of this workshop from you all, so I'm looking forward to covering as much as possible. So I am a producer of nonfiction and fiction films and series, but I really sort of learned my way through the film industry in post-production. I sort of knew early on that I wanted to be a producer, that I wanted to be a filmmaker, but I needed a way to sort of learn while also making a living, and post-production was an amazing way for me to do that. Post-production was a way for me to engage very directly with directors, in sort of somewhat of a calmer and smaller environment, and to learn filmmaking from the perspective of editing, music, visual effects, sound and picture finishing. I learned about festival distribution, and then through the process of technical and legal and business delivery of many films, I learned a lot about the sort of guts of a film, the nitty-gritty technical and sort of flow of paperwork that sort of makes a film possible. So post-production is a great way to learn filmmaking in many different dimensions. So next slide, please. I actually can't see the screen. Okay, great. So this is a workshop about myth busting post-production. And so let's just talk briefly about what some of the goals of this workshop are and how we're going to get there. So one thing we're going to do is sort of look at a post workflow and sort of the overall post process step by step, and talk about how on your specific film, you'll be creating a post workflow and assembling a team that can really serve the needs of a specific project. We are going to go back to some of these myths about post-production. I have in my career many times worked with incredibly talented, incredibly knowledgeable filmmakers who still admit to being intimidated by post, various aspects of post, the technical dimensions of post. And so let's talk about some of those myths that make post seem unapproachable to otherwise extremely knowledgeable filmmakers. And then finally, we're going to talk about the part where we learn to love post-production. And for me, I do love post-production. And I think that the sort of conditions that allow you to love post-production are when you have clear communication and a sense of shared creativity throughout the process. So we'll talk about how to create conditions where your team is working with the resources that they need and working towards a cohesive creative goal. All right, next slide, please. All right, so here we are with post myth number one. Post is so many moving parts, it's impossible to know where to start. So let's move to the next slide, where we will see a post workflow that kind of gives us a sense of what a lot of the positions in the post world look like. And also we'll sort of get into the timeline in which you may start engaging with a lot of these creative collaborators and technical teams as you're moving through the post of your film. So we're going to begin somewhat counterintuitively in the upper right-hand corner of this flowchart. Sure, got to start somewhere. My own background is as a post supervisor, so I particularly want to talk about the role of post supervision in sort of being a driving force throughout the whole post process. So a post supervisor supported by post coordinator and post PAs, kind of like coordinator and post PAs. Oh, sorry, I think someone can turn your microphone off, please. Thank you. So post supervisors supported by post coordinators and post PAs are sort of the line producers of post. A post supervisor is responsible for managing the post budget, providing support to all of the different departments. And then as the workflow progresses, you're sort of designing and overseeing the workflow to suit the particular needs of that film. You're also making sure that the departments are talking to each other. Everyone has a sense of sort of how this is working collectively as we move toward the completion of the film. And the post-admin team is working really closely in conjunction with the editorial team. So we're sort of going now over to the upper left-hand corner. And so we're going to talk quite a bit more about the roles of editor and assistant editor, particularly in the world of documentaries as we go through this workshop. But I would say broadly speaking, these are the roles that sort of make up the editorial team, which is going to be the creative and technical brain center of your film during post, and very much determine the timeline that you see below you of sort of the different phases of having your cut, and then finally finishing. And so editor and assistant editor we'll get into a bit more. I just wanted to touch on story producers and consulting editors. Depending on the needs of your project, these are folks that you might engage at the very beginning of post and editorial, where you're sort of trying to shape your ideas about how this process is going to evolve on both a story level and an editorial technical level. But these also might be folks that you engage later down the line when you have a good sense of sort of how your story is going, how your film is evolving, and you need outside perspectives to sort of help advance you to the next phase of things, or to simply give you, a little bit of outsider perspective that's going to be valuable in bringing the cut on home. So one thing that I wanted to sort of pause and define before we get in further is the word workflow. This is a very simple term in many ways, but I also remember when I was starting off as a post supervisor, this was a term I heard all the time in conjunction with post-production. And I think sometimes you hear a word that you know in the context of a film department, and suddenly you think, does this have another meaning? So I'm going to define some of these sort of basic terms, such as workflow, throughout the course of this workshop, in hopes that that will be helpful, or maybe you have relief that someone finally defined it for you. So workflow I define as simply the process by which information and media is transferred from one department or individual to the next for completion of the film. So that can refer to, I would say, sort of the overall workflow of post, which is really how your media and all of these other assets are sort of passing hands throughout the process, but it also means how you're communicating and sort of the order in which you're going to be engaging with these different departments. So let's look at the sort of bottom half of this chart now. I will say that this is sort of a guideline for the sort of time when you may begin engaging with these different post collaborators, but there's no one size fits all prescription for films. The specific needs of your film are going to determine where you're going to place your focus, where you're going to place the sort of heft of your budget during post. So the post workflow and the departments and individuals that you're collaborating with at any given time are going to be very largely influenced by where you are in editorial. So I have begun this process with the rough cut. And so a rough cut, to define another term, is sort of the phase where your seeds are in rough order and the shape and style of your film is becoming evident. Like, I mean, you have work to do. Maybe there are some, big-ish moves down the road, but you're really starting to see what your finished film is going to look like. And I would say at this point, you're going to want to start thinking, we'll get into this later, but you're going to want to start thinking about your creative engagement with your post collaborators pretty early on in the process, as early as possible, really. But I would say that a rough cut is when you're going to start really actively working with your archival team, if your film has archives, particularly if your film has a significant volume of archives. Because as you're moving through your rough cut, you're going to start sort of nailing down what are the archival images or moving picture that you're going to be using, what are the specifics around that, how is it creatively shaping your cut. And then as you move into fine cut, which is sort of when your editorial focus becomes more granular, you're not so focused on big picture changes. You are literally editing on a fine level. That is when you're going to begin to engage with a lot of other post departments. We're talking about original music, a composer that you're bringing in, visual effects, graphic design, and very significantly, you're going to start working with your sound design team to create the soundscape for the film as you're moving towards the mix. And then let's say that your film has gotten into a festival. Fantastic. So now you're moving towards picture lock. This is the moment when you are no longer going to make any picture changes. At this point, this is sort of pedal to the metal time. These are the departments that you're engaging in order to really move towards finishing the film. So at this point, you're going to start clearing any licensed music and archives. And it's important, I would say, to wait until picture lock to begin this clearance process, because both music and archives duration and usage is extremely crucial when it comes to licensing these things for your film. You're going to move into picture finishing, which is the online edit, color correction, and final deliverables or initial deliverables, depending on where you're headed with your film. And then the final mix, which is the really exciting moment when you are tying together all of your sound design and making things sound incredible. And then you'll create deliverables for your premiere. And so again, a sort of term that I want to define are deliverables. And this is the actual digital or physical files that you will send to a festival, a distributor, etc., anyone who is going to be exhibiting your film. And these deliverables can include a DCP, an IMF, QuickTime file, and when you get into technical and paperwork delivery, which is a phase that you would typically get into after working with a distributor, you will also be delivering a lot of sort of raw files that make up sort of the technical and business side of the film. And this is everything from raw camera files to chain of title documents to all of the agreements that people signed on set. All of that you're organizing and essentially turning over the business of your film from one entity to another. So this is a lot of information to take in, and we will talk more about all of these, but this is, I think, a rough guideline of sort of when you want to be engaging with these different post collaborators in earnest as your film is on a journey from rough cut all the way to premiere and delivery. And then I also want to say that these are sort of the major departments that make up post. And so we can think of these as sort of different filmmaking languages that contribute technically and creatively to post. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. All right, next slide, please. So post myth number 2, post comes after production. Seems pretty straightforward, but as the next slide shows, it is grammatically, yes, post does come after production but I like to think of post as being a fully integrated part of the filmmaking process and something that you're thinking about even as you're entering development. Post is at its best a creative, collaborative part of your film that's also going to evolve your film in terms of how it makes meaning, how it's written throughout editorial and in post, and all of the creative contributions that come out of post will significantly impact your film. So you're starting to think about post during development. The first way that I would recommend approaching that is in the way that you're budgeting. As you're thinking about your film and what you want your film to become, what are the areas of post that are most essential to sort of getting the creative and technical vision of this film fulfilled? Not every film is different. You may have a film where you have a lot of really ambitious visual effects, but there's not necessarily going to be original music. You may have a film where the score is everything, the sound design is everything, but visually, you don't have any visual effects. It's graphically very simple. This analysis, no matter how rough it may be at the development stage, is going to inform not only how you structure your budget and sort of which post departments are receiving sort of the most weight as far as your attention and your resources in the budget, but they're also going to sort of inform where are you headed first in terms of engaging with post collaborators and what are the conversations that you need to start really early. I would also say that as you're thinking about post in the early phases of your film, there may be aspects of the prospect of getting into post on this film that are really intimidating. And I would say that this is information about where you need to place some of your energy, your sort of early collaborations, seek consultation, figure out sort of if something is keeping you awake at night in terms of the post-production of your film, this is really good information that this is an area where you simply need to do more research and find collaborators who are going to, give you a path to complete the film. Something else to think about during development, early production is how you're organizing your media and editorial workflow. Particularly in documentaries, it's not uncommon for a film to have a long editorial life. Potentially, it may pass hands from director to editor to another editor. Very early on, you want to be sure that you are organizing your media in a way that can be sort of easily understood as you move through the process of the film. I recommend bringing in an assistant editor to create a setup for you that's sort of easily comprehensible as the film may pass hands, or simply just keeps, your media organized, keeps your editorial workflow organized, where everything is. And then so again, as you're sort of thinking through this, you're going to start to identify where are the areas of post that are either sort of feeling really challenging or possibly just really exciting in terms of sort of lending itself to the full creative completion of the film. And these are the departments that you want to loop into early creative conversations, talking about post professionals from sound and music, thinking about color as you're having conversations with your cinematographer early on. How are graphics going to help tell your story? These are all things to consider, I would say, really early on in the process. And so again, bringing your post team into the loop as early as possible is beneficial, not only creatively, but you will again establish really clear workflows, ideally that take you from production to post with really clear communication and intentions all the way. And of course, we're leaving things subject to surprise and twists because we're documentary filmmakers and these things are often part of our stories. But I would say knowing how your media is organized, knowing sort of what the sort of best route of communication is with your creative collaborators will allow these twists and shifts to progress a lot more smoothly. And then finally, I want to sort of address this idea of post and production being sort of at odds with each other or being sort of very discrete parts of the filmmaking process. And we'll talk about this more because they are in many ways discrete parts of the filmmaking process, but in almost every film, and particularly in nonfiction, your story is being written in the edit. You are shaping the way that on a grand level and on a small level, you are shaping the way that your story will exist in the world, the way it will make meaning using the edit and all of the tools of post-production. And I also think in documentaries, the process particularly facilitates sort of a smooth back and forth between the ideas of production and post. You know, in documentary, we're often asked to produce sort of evolving proof of concept. You're building often a gradual edit and you're going back to shoot more and then you're coming back into the edit to make sense of the story. I think in this way, it's really useful to kind of collapse the categories of production and post, to think of them not as something, you know, where one follows the other and there's sort of these things that are sort of separate and not talking to each other, but really as sort of one ongoing conversation between production and post to make the filmmaking process as cohesive and as smooth as possible. All right, next slide, please. Oh, all right, great. So next, post myth. Post is only for super technically savvy people. This is the face that we make when we are faced with technology that feels intimidating. But next slide, please. So I will start off by saying that I am not a super technically savvy person. And when I started as a post supervisor, this was a particular source of anxiety for me. And it still is to this day. But I think that if we think about post in a much more holistic way, then I think a lot of the potential and a lot of the skills that are necessary to be successful in post come into view. And those are not all necessarily technical skills. So here we have our flow chart again, or our graph. And I wanted to sort of show this again to emphasize the idea that I think post is a place with is a place where like people with many different skill sets can thrive. I think whether you are a visual storyteller, whether you're extremely technically skilled, whether you're, you know, extremely devoted to details, or someone who sort of thinks in big ideas through filmmaking, there is a place for you in post-production. And so these are the roles, and I would say that this is not necessarily have to be prescriptive either, but these are the roles that I think have particular emphasis on visual artistry and storytelling in post. And I'll just say that I've highlighted here editor, assistant editor, story producer, archival research, original music, visual effects, sound design, graphic design, picture finishing, and final mix. These are the areas where creative meaning is really being made through these cinematic languages, and that there will be really highly specialized skills and talents that you will find in each of these departments that really contribute to the visual storytelling of the film, as well as sort of the way the story is shaped and felt in a theater. Next slide, please. So again, I've sort of used our chart to identify roles in post-production where I think being a technical whiz is very useful, but also being someone who's extremely detail-oriented. I think a lot of us are. It's what allows us to thrive in post-production as well as in other parts of filmmaking. And so these are the roles where I see extreme attention to details and a willingness, I would say, to innovate, to learn new things about workflows, to learn new things about filmmaking all of the time are really sort of the driving forces of success in these departments. And so again, I will read that I have marked post-supervisor, post-coordinator, editor, assistant editor, archival researcher, visual effects, sound design, graphic design, clearance of music and archives, picture finishing, final mix, and deliverables. These are all departments where you really kind of get inside the bones of filmmaking. You sort of take the film apart and put it back together. And I think that that demands an incredible level of technical skill, but also a comprehension of filmmaking and sort of what is a workflow that works for this particular film. I also think that these are folks who you develop your own workflow as you learn. And I think that that is in itself its own art form. It's not just what you produce, but it's also how you do it. How do you integrate sort of all of the different tools of filmmaking that are necessary for the success of this project? Next slide, please. And then finally, this is sort of, my version of sort of, these are the big ideas people in post. So I will say every single position on this chart is marked because I believe that all of the positions in post have the ability to contribute meaningfully to the film and also contribute meaningfully to the environment that the film is made in. I would say on every post team I have ever worked on, good ideas come from every department and every role. I think post can be really highly specialized. So people have these incredible pockets of specific knowledge that will inevitably come up with a solution or contribute something really meaningful to the film. So as you're moving through post, everyone is a potential source for good ideas. And I think that, the more we listen to each other, the better the film ends up being. All right, next slide. So yes, Maya, that's great. It's wonderful that there are places for all of these different sort of interests and skills in post-production, but thinking about technical post-production still freaks me out. So let's talk about that. The first thing I would say about this is that filmmaking technology is extremely specialized and is constantly evolving. In the course of doing research for this workshop, I learned that the first film was not edited on Avid Media Composer until 1992. It is an indie film called Let's Kill All the Lawyers, which I have not seen. But my point is that, this is the way we think of as sort of the only way to cut a film. And this is a sort of technological approach that has really only existed for 20 years. Film technology is changing all the time. You can't know everything. So you really have to ask yourself, what is the specific knowledge that I need for the particulars of my project? And this is all sort of part of the early development consideration and budgeting approach that I spoke about earlier. This will really sort of crystallize the knowledge that you need for your particular project to make it a success. And I would follow that up by saying, ask a lot of questions. Once you know where those areas are, who are the sort of potential collaborators that you are interested in working with, who are around you, and ask them a lot of questions. I think that, and then I'm sort of skipping ahead to the last bullet point here, but I think that's something that can also be intimidating, particularly for emerging filmmakers, is figuring out how to engage with the people who might join your post team, who might become your collaborators in post. And I would say, I think that's really natural, especially if you are engaging with people whose work you admire. But I think you look around, you find the people who are working on films that feel like they share some sort of creative goals with your film, and reach out to these people. I have found more often than not, if you reach out with very specific questions or specific creative challenges that you sort of want to chew on with someone who's very highly knowledgeable, most people are willing to engage. There's a reason that we got into these very sort of specific parts of filmmaking, and it's because we're interested in them. And so I think more often than not, if you reach out and ask someone, hey, could I buy a cup of coffee or hop on Zoom for 30 minutes and sort of bend your ear about these unique post challenges that I have for my project, most people are willing to engage with you. So I would say that falls under ask a lot of questions. And then when it comes to, I would say, more granular things in post, especially, working with particular software, working sort of with particular technical workflows, I cannot emphasize how much YouTube has helped me. I would say that YouTube, Reddit, Adobe Help Expert are really sort of your best bets when it comes to solving sort of a discrete technical problem. Everybody does it. Don't be shy to use YouTube. And then finally, if sort of the technical aspects of post, or even just post overall, feels like it's sort of swirling above your head still, I would say that engaging a post supervisor will make a huge, huge difference. A post supervisor's job is to really sort of design and oversee a workflow that suits the specific needs of your film. And then also throughout the process, tweak that workflow if things are changing, if things are needing more evolution. A post supervisor coordinates with each of the different departments to make sure that they're talking to each other, and most significantly, that we're sort of all on the road to the same creative destination. I will also say that if we're thinking of the different post departments as sort of different languages of filmmaking, that post supervisor is someone who might not be fluent in all of those languages, but they speak the local language well enough to kind of get from point A to point B. All right, next slide, next myth, please. All right, so the next myth is after production, I will be left all alone with my footage and I won't have the support of my crew and creative partners, and I will just be this sad figure staring out at the sea. But let's talk about that a little bit. Next slide, please. So I think a lot of this fear, and I will start by saying that something that I've done a lot in my career is work with first-time directors. And I think for first-time directors, post can be particularly intimidating because you've just been through this tremendous effort of production in many cases. You have had a lot of sort of immediate, very sort of physical, fast-paced interaction with your collaborators on set. And now you are moving into a totally different phase. And it is easy to feel like all of this creative energy you've had around you has sort of vanished. I would say that there are a couple of ways to address this assumption or this feeling. And the first of which is to understand that in many cases, the sort of nature of collaboration in production and post are going to be necessarily a little different. So, production is very physical work. It's fast moving. You are problem solving literally on your feet most of the time. And I think it's, you form sort of a camaraderie and a bond with people that you work with in production just by virtue of being sort of put in these very intense situations where you have a lot of problems to solve by the end of the day, and it's all moving quite fast. Post can be very different. I think that it's a process where your collaborations sort of evolve more gradually. I think that it gives you time to be a little bit more thoughtful. And then because it's a more gradual process, the sort of impact of your collaborators on the work is a little bit less immediate, can be more subject to change, or can be felt in sort of more subtle ways. So I think understanding that you're not losing collaborators when you shift from production to post, but you are potentially sort of changing the way that you engage. And I think balancing these sort of different attitudes about filmmaking can really help smooth that transition. One thing I will say is that I also, as a post supervisor, have worked with a lot of directors who have super skilled, super talented producers, but they are primarily producers who are comfortable being in production, being on set, running, gunning, whatever, what have you. But they don't know a lot about post. And so I would say, if you have a producer who's not super comfortable with post, find someone who can support that process and really, be transparent as a producer. About what your expectations are during post, how much support you can provide or not provide. And then I would say finally, the most important thing is understanding that there really is a through line from production to post in terms of specific creative departments. And the earlier that you are able to introduce these folks, if they're sort of different people who are going to be contributing to the film in production and post, and create a line of communication so that they can share ideas, specific challenges for this film, and specific workflow needs, this is going to help you tremendously, as well as I think really create a creative bridge so that, as we talked about before, it doesn't feel like you're coming out of production and then, sort of reinventing the wheel. You have this sort of fluidity between production and post that allows these workflows and conversations to flow really naturally. All right, next slide, please. All right, so this is a question that I got quite a bit in the preliminary questions that you all submitted about how best to approach the relationship between the director and editor. And so I thought I'd take a little bit of time to talk about this. So what I will say is that this is, one of those relationships in filmmaking that feels kind of like a marriage. I think in many ways, the director editor relationship is a really challenging one, a really important one, and one where you're sort of really tangibly producing something creative together. So I'd like to approach this from the vantage point of asking questions about, how you as a director or as an editor are approaching a particular partnership or a particular project. I think the first thing to consider is the phase where you are beginning to engage with an editor. And this can be sort of anywhere from you have an idea and a little bit of footage and you're trying to play around with it and see if it has legs, if it's going to go somewhere. Maybe you have an outline, maybe you have a written treatment, maybe you have a full-on script and you have a really confident idea about what this film is going to be and where it's going to go. And then, as is the case so often in documentary, different editors come in at different times to help facilitate the needs of the cut. So you may be going in with an assembly, or you may be going in with a cut that has just simply hit a wall for whatever reason. Your previous editor had to go on to another job. Something's not working. You need a reset, and that's why you're going to this particular editor. So I would say, based on sort of where the phase is, this is going to really shape your intention in engaging with the editor. And so what you need to sort of evaluate as you're going into this partnership is, what are the fixed ideas that I already have about this project, and where am I open to having the editor's contributions? Where am I open to having the editor's perspective really shape the story? And what's the best way for us to do that collectively as a team? Ideally, you are engaging with this editor because they have something special and specific that is going to sort of enhance the creative qualities that you're looking for in your film. And so how are you going to engage with that editor's sort of unique perspective, unique skill set, unique storytelling abilities for this specific story? I would say, again, the next question is sort of, what is the workflow that can facilitate the best communication with the editor? And I think something that's really unique about partnerships in filmmaking is that you have access to a lot of different languages to communicate with each other about filmmaking. So for some directors and editors, it may be that you sit in the same room together and you try stuff out sort of piece by piece, and that's the best way for you to work together. For some directors and editors, it may be that, a lot of directors are also editors. So it may be that you as the director cut a scene, send it over to the editor, let them play with it a little bit, send it back to you, and you're communicating using the language of the film to express your ideas and where you see the direction of the film going. I think a lot of people have successfully been able to make this work in the last couple of years by sort of passing project files back and forth while talking on the phone or on Zoom. It really, I would say, depends on what your specific needs are, and then experimenting with how you best communicate between the director and editor. And then finally, for directors, what are you willing to let go of? We'll talk about this more later, but post-production is sort of a process of discovery and loss. I would say that you will come upon discoveries that are really exciting, only to sort of later realize that this doesn't fit in my movie. Unfortunately, we have to let it go. So I think when you're bringing on an editor, you're you're bringing them on to edit, to sort of strategically identify the things that are and are not working in your film, and how far are you willing to be flexible about what that means as a director? You know, how firmly are you held on to certain vision, and what are you sort of willing to consider as a possibility, as something that might not belong in this film? I would say for editors, a lot of the questions are the same. You know, as you are receiving an idea, a treatment, a script, or possibly even a cut, how are you understanding this director's vision for the film, and how are you seeing it differently? How you're seeing it differently is the strength that you have in sort of approaching a new project. This is how you're going to create space for conversation. This is kind of how you're going to, in some cases, create tension that you're going to work through with the director to sort of come out on the other side and decide, you know, this is actually what this scene means. This is actually what it's supposed to look like. And that difference in perspective is valuable in creating sort of the creative evolution. Again, as an editor, assert what communication workflow works best for you. Do you need time to edit independently before you engage with the director? Do you want the director sort of in the room with you? These are all important things to communicate. And then finally, what are the resources, sort of technically, materially, and creatively, that you need to do your best work on this project? Communicating that as clearly and as early as possible is really going to help facilitate the project. All right, next slide, please. All right, post-myth number 5. All I need to finish the film is, or until it's time to finish the film, all I really need is a good editor. Next slide, please. All right, that is false. You need a great assistant editor. And I want to take this moment as a former post-supervisor. Post-supervisors and assistant editors work very, very closely together in many cases. I want to shout out to assistant editors. It's a really challenging, and I think in many cases, kind of thankless job. I think that assistant editors are the unsung heroes of post. So I just want to take this opportunity to thank the assistant editors I've worked with, who have made post-production flow in an almost invisible way. Thank you. So a great assistant editor is really invaluable. And, you know, depending on the scope and scale of your project, it's possible that you have an editor who doubles as an assistant editor, but having someone who is dedicated to this position is absolutely essential, sort of keeping post flowing smoothly. So a great assistant editor has many, many roles that they fill, and some of those things that they ideally might do: keeping media organized, keeping everything backed up and to date. If you don't have a DIT, your assistant editor may become your de facto DIT on the production side. This is an absolutely crucial job in terms of sort of establishing those early, clear workflows we're talking about. An assistant editor is vital to that. An assistant editor is also coordinating with all of the creative and technical teams who are going to come into post as the cut progresses. They're going to be receiving specs for how they want media turned over to them. They're going to be establishing these workflows. They're going to be creating tests of these workflows. And then they're going to be helping sort of communicate through any kind of questions or technical snafus as the process progresses. The assistant editors will also sort of do the behind the scenes work of helping the editor and creative team create all of these things that will sort of allow your in progress cut to look and sound as good as possible sort of on the road, and explore some of the creative post that's going to eventually contribute to the success of your film. And this can include temp color, temp sound, temp VFX, music edits, graphics. I also know a lot of assistant editors who cut scenes and are not necessarily always credited for this. Their contribution to the creative aspects of filmmaking is huge. Assistant editors will also handle all of the incredibly demanding nitty-gritty file sharing that become a huge part of your process as you are moving through late stages of post into distribution, exports, uploads, sharing links, managing links, making sure that the Dropbox folder is not password protected or it is password protected. All those little nitty-gritty things your assistant editor will take care of. As you move into delivery, you will lean on your assistant editor to create cue sheets. These are sort of lists of, every piece of licensed music in the film, every piece of archive in the film that you may need to provide to a distributor as you are moving through that process. They will be the ones who are logging many, many pieces of time code in a painstaking way. And then finally, because the assistant editor is involved in all of these many different areas of post, and they know the film really, really well. Often assistant editors will sort of you'll be on a mix stage and be like, when's that scene? When's the scene when the bird flies in? And of course, the assistant editor will sort of sort of pop up from the back of the room and be like, oh, that's that time code, like minute 7 and 12 seconds and 4 frames. So they know the film really well, and they probably have really good ideas about the film because they know it backwards, frontwards, upside down. So, rely on your assistant editor, honor your assistant editor, respect your assistant editor, and thank them for their incredible hard work. All right, next slide, please. Okay, this is a common myth. Number 6, I can fix it in post. Next slide, please. So I think fixing it in post is sort of a cliche for a reason. And there are lots of things that you can and should be able to fix in post. But I think if you are thinking about your film process as something really integrated, where you are able to sort of keep production and post talking to each other, anticipating the challenges of post, and thinking about it really as something that's not going to happen, someday down the line, but something that's sort of present creatively in your film and the way that you are developing and approaching the filmmaking, you will have fewer things that you need to fix in post. Imagine if you come across a technical challenge on that very day, you can sort of call upon the person who's going to be working on your film in post-production for that department and say, hey, we have come across this roadblock or this challenge, I don't really know what to do about it. They may have a solution that will allow you to fix it in production and then sort of smoothly move on to post. So thinking about it and engaging with your collaborators again early on is going to be a really crucial way to make sure that you don't have all of these sort of big story things or big technical things that you are trying to fix in post. And again, some things I think are fine: minor VFX, ADR, graphics, sound effects. These are all things that we expect to be part of post and are amazing for fixing small issues within filmmaking and making things seamless and beautiful. All right, next slide, please. All right, post myth number 7, post is not creative. Clearly, I disagree with that. Next slide, please. So I think post is very creative, and there are so many tools in post and so many processes and sort of creative engagements in post that will have a really profound effect on the creative development of your film. Again, I think that this misconception about post not being super creative is sort of comes out of this false idea that post and production are sort of in opposition to each other, or are these very sort of divorced processes of filmmaking. I think that you see people's creative effort in production in a very immediate way. And sometimes post can feel like it's taking a long time, or you're not arriving at the creative solutions in this sort of like immediate and satisfying way. Stay with the process. This is a different kind of creativity. So I would say too that a lot of times the people who work in post, who are have the most profound artistic contributions to a film, are sort of best realized when no one notices those contributions. I mean, I think a lot of times immersive or naturalistic sound design, you don't think about it as being designed because it just feels like the world of the film that you're watching in this sort of ineffable way. I think, really seamless VFX, really well integrated graphic design, color that feels like it just ushers you into the world of the film. When you're not noticing these things, it doesn't mean that a tremendous amount of creativity and hard work has not gone into them. So I will say too, again, that I think post is a process of discovery and loss. you may be going into post with a really clear idea of what your film is, but I guarantee you that you might be wrong about parts of it. You are going to discover so many things through the editorial process and then through the other creative processes that make up later stages of post. And you're also going to have to be open to letting things go, to saying goodbye to darlings in the edit, scenes that you shot years ago and have been in love with and have always felt like they're the heart and soul of a certain part of your film. When you get to a certain stage of post, you might realize this doesn't fit anymore. And, thank you for your service, but you're not going to be part of this film anymore. I think something that I've seen really commonly in sort of later stages of the edit, maybe you have been working with temp music or sound effects or even visual effects. And as you are starting to bring in your original score or your final effects, it's different. It takes a while for you to adapt to the change that you're seeing because you've really gotten used to or fallen in love with those temp assets. This is, again, a process of discovery and a process of loss. It's about making sure that you give yourself time to adapt to these creative changes and are also sort of understanding that, you need to let things go sometimes as you're moving through in order to sort of really create the ultimate creative vision. I will also say that I think that post-production can be challenging and the creative decisions that you make in post-production can be really intimidating because they are final. For documentary filmmakers, especially, our projects take a long time. You can be sort of engaged in this process for years and years. And the idea that you're always open to more possibilities, sort of more time to shoot, more time to edit, you're getting to the place where it feels like your film is fully realized can take a long time. And then when you're finally in the room, with your sound designer, with your colorist, and you're making those final decisions about what the film is going to look and feel and sound like, it can be actually, I think, a little bit distressing. And so I think that's another thing to keep in mind, that post is really exciting and it is creatively fulfilling, but it is challenging because these are decisions that theoretically you're not going to rewrite at any point. These are the decisions that are going to determine how your film is going to live in the world. And then finally, I think the different sort of creative contributions of post are really the creative building blocks of cinema. And I think that if you look at this spectrum from editing, color, sound design and mix, music, visual effects, graphics, archival materials, it's hard to imagine any film without these. These are so much the building blocks of cinema. These are so much the way that we make meaning of cinema. And so to get into post is really to have a totally new sort of set of tools in your creative approach to your film. And the more you think about it that way, I think the more you will be excited to engage with these different creative departments in post. Okay, next slide, please. Post myth number 9. Post is way too expensive. Next slide, please. So filmmaking is often expensive. Post is no exception, but the sort of tool that you have in anticipating the costs of post-production for your film really comes out of your budgeting process that should begin in development. Your post budget is a living document. It is not a one-time thing to sort of be created and then adhered to, regardless of whatever changes may occur in the filmmaking process. I think that budgeting is as much of a creative part of filmmaking as anything else. You are constantly evolving your budget, placing weight in different departments, getting really creative with how you are able to structure things, and then that's going to evolve through the life of your project. I believe that the folks at IDA are providing a budget template that I created for this workshop, which is a budget for the great fictional nonfiction project Untitled Bread Making Project. So I hope that will be distributed to everyone. This is a template. This is sort of an idea about how you might structure a post budget for a sort of mid-budget archival documentary with talking heads, verite, and archive. And I think templates are really, really helpful. They will point you in the right direction, but your film will instruct you how to budget. I think that you will understand sort of on an ongoing basis what the demands of the film are, and the early creative conversations that you're having with your potential post collaborators are really going to be very instructive in sort of how you envision your budget, and sort of knowing, you know, what numbers you need to potentially back into, where you might need to get really creative about how you approach this. So another thing I want to say is that a lot of the really essential technical work that happens in post can feel invisible, especially if you are working with a post vendor, a studio, and you're only communicating maybe with the studio producer or the DI producer. You don't have a direct line to the artists and technicians who are doing a lot of the sort of invisible work of post. I mean, I'm talking about exports, renders, file tests, all kinds of sort of temp work that you would engage with to get ready for a screening. All of this is being done by skilled humans who are, you know, engaging in actual labor and engaging with like really specialized skills. So sometimes it can be sort of shocking to see how much certain deliverables cost or certain, you know, renders cost. But understand this is not just a computer spitting these things out. These are skilled people who are also contributing to the creative and technical integrity of your film. Again, going back to sort of the early budgeting and sort of the evolving budgeting that you're going to be doing, the earlier that you connect with your potential post collaborators about what your budget is going to look like and what you hope it will look like, what it might look like, this will give you a really good sense of what that collaboration is going to look like. I think a lot of people in our community are willing to work on a sliding scale if they are really invested in a project. Maybe they need flexibility of time, maybe they need flexibility of resources. Have those conversations, figure out how you can make things work within your parameters, and be really realistic about it in the way that you're budgeting not just your financial resources, but also your time, so that you can really work as creatively and clearly with those people as possible. I would say also, the more you learn about post, the more you can improvise. And I would say that that sort of exists on a macro and micro level, from, you know, knowing sort of a workaround so you can maybe drop a shot into a conform without having to rebalance your reels. Or on a really broad level, someone has an incredible idea about a specific sound effect that you've been trying to achieve, but you didn't know how to get there. I would say, you know, really talk to the people in different post departments. They are very knowledgeable about the work that they do. They will have creative solutions to things, and they will also have technical solutions to things. And I also want to take this opportunity, as we're talking about post budgeting, to encourage filmmakers to plan for accessibility in your post budget. In post, that is where you are going to be creating captions, open captions or closed captions, and audio description. This is going to bring your film to an even larger audience. These are essential things to budget for and implement during post. All right, next slide, please. Okay, this is our final myth. This is the big one. One day I will truly stop worrying about post, and it will be so chill. I will just be this very relaxed astronaut. Next slide, please. Unfortunately, I believe that is false. If anyone has learned how to stop worrying about post, let us know in the chat. I'm personally am worried about post right now on a project I'm shooting next week. But I'm coping with it. And here are some ways that I am coping with it. I think that worrying within reason can be really instructive. It can sort of generate creative energy in a certain direction, and also help you identify where you need to be placing more of your energy, more of your collaboration, where you need to be engaging with your collaborators from a very early stage of the process. I think that If something is keeping you up at night and you're thinking like, I don't know how we're going to make that shot work. I don't know what that workflow looks like getting to the visual effects designer. What is this going to be? It means you need to talk to someone who is really knowledgeable about that and sort of figure out the path. And then I will also say that because I think there is this, myth around post that hopefully we've sort of helped debunked a bit today, but that like the unknown in post can also create a lot of anxiety. And so I also think that, having those conversations early might actually reveal that the thing that you're super worried about is not actually that complicated and you should just get some sleep. So I would say the next thing that sort of helps me cope with stress in post-production is just understanding that the technology is constantly changing. The people I know who are most knowledgeable about technical post are constantly learning new things. And that is sort of where this like, YouTubing comes in handy, sort of seeing what's out there. What are people talking about? A lot of technology is released all the time, and not everyone is on top of everything, but it is an invitation to keep learning. I think as with most things, clear communication is the key to post-production. We're talking about communication between departments, talking about the tone that is set by the directors and producers in post. Everyone feels like a valued member of the team. If everyone is able to be on the same page about what is happening in post, things flow more smoothly. And then finally, I just want to take a second to talk about post-production and mental health. I think that a lot of the conditions of post-production can be really challenging on mental health. I think a lot of post involves repetitive labor, a lot of really detail-oriented labor, and on a literal level, sitting in a dark room, looking at a screen all the time. I think the sort of stress of post deadlines can be really challenging. And, I've seen a lot of difficulties around mental health in my time working in post-production. So in approaching post, I think we have to think about how do we make this a healthier environment? How can we reduce stress? And I think part of that is sort of through really clear expectations that sort of come again from the top down, from the directors and producers through the post supervisors and editorial department to everyone else, having really clear expectations. Listen, sometimes deadlines are crunchy, but acknowledging them and sort of making sure that people are resourced to meet those deadlines is the best that we can do. I think that all parts of filmmaking can be challenging. I think it often feels like the stakes are really, really high, but everything that we can do to create environments where we can have compassion and rest and really feel like no matter where you are in the process, no matter what member of the team you are, that you're really being valued as a contributor to a collective project, because that is what you are as a member of a post team. You are a contributor creatively and technically to a collective art project. All right, next slide. That's it. Thank you so much, everyone. This was wonderful. And now I'm going to take questions in the chat. Thank you again. Okay, I received a document with questions and I'm going to look at those now. All right, let's see. These are great questions. I'm trying to find the best one. Let's see, in your experience. All right, I'll start at the beginning. Post budget as a percentage of the total budget. This team of post specialists sounds incredibly dreamy, but also expensive. Is there a snowball effect at times where names garner other names? This is a great question. So I would say that, again, it's really hard to sort of prescribe what is the right percentage of the budget that your post budget should occupy. It depends greatly on the needs of the production. Like, for example, if you have a film that is primarily or entirely an archival film, your post budget is going to be the vast majority of your budget, just point blank. If you have a film that is sort of going to be, I would say, you know, much more heavily scripted in production, and you're working with interviews, and you go into the edit with a really strong sense of sort of what the flow of this film is going to look like, your post budget might be a little more modest. You might have, you know, like the big challenges of your project might be in production and sort of securing those characters and interviews, and then post is, you know, a process of sort of refining, polishing, and finishing. But I would say that like my sort of common wisdom is that a post budget is often a lot higher than you would expect it to be, you know, depending again on like above the line fees and everything. But I think when you look at production and post, I generally think of it as like a 40-60 ratio is an okay guiding principle, meaning 40% for production and 60% for post. And I think, yes, it is really hard to imagine, particularly with an independent documentary, sort of having someone in each one of these roles. And then, so I would say that that really creates a necessity to create very close and very collaborative partnerships with the people who are going to be sort of working through the various departments of your film, whether that's editorial, sound, color, visual effects, etc. You are really going to want to engage in those conversations early on. And again, be transparent about where you are. You know, this is our intended budget. This is our budget gap. You know, this is when we're hoping to get into this phase of post. What does that look like for you? What can you accommodate? Are there people that you partner with or like to work with who might be able to contribute to this project as well? Or does this feel like something where, you know, maybe we need to go back to the drawing board and rethink, like, you know, having 25 visual effects in trying to squeeze that into like $1,000 budget might not be that realistic. So, you know, again, the specialized collaborators that you're going to engage with early on in post are really going to instruct what your budget looks like. Okay, how have the dynamics changed in a remote post-COVID world? Are there tools you find more useful for better virtual workflows and reviewing, sharing when you don't work in the same space? That is a great question. I mean, that has been one of the major challenges of the past couple of years. I am happy to say that I have very successfully produced and post-produced a couple of projects completely virtually. I do think that, you know, a lot of the same principles apply over a remote workflow that they would if you were sitting in the same room together. Finding a good flow of communication. Are you the kind of director who needs to check in with your team every day? Or are you the kind of director who kind of wants someone to work independently for a couple of days and then really dive in, give extensive notes, have a long conversation, and then let them kind of go back into it? Again, I think that it's really the sort of individual partnerships and personalities that will determine what's an effective workflow. I will say that in terms of like actual sort of software tools, there are great sort of increased syncing capabilities in Premiere in terms of both cloud storage and file sharing. I really prefer Premiere for nonfiction projects. You know, no shade to any other editing software, but I do think that the good folks at Adobe have really been keeping in mind how to keep up with an increasingly virtual production oriented world. And then in terms of, you know, file sharing and sort of organization, Google Drive, pretty straightforward stuff. Zoom, Dropbox, don't put really big files on Dropbox. Like don't put anything over like a couple dozen gigs because it will be really hard to pull down on the other end. WeTransfer Pro is great for, I think it's like $12 a month. It's really effective tool for transferring large files. And then of course, sometimes you can't rely on your upload or download speeds, and you have to simply send someone a physical hard drive, just like in the old days. Okay, let's see, more questions. While you say each and every role is a big idea's role in post, how do you stay focused on your vision while there are many ideas floating around? How do you stop yourself from wandering away from what you initially thought and planned? is it a problem wandering and experimenting too much in post? That is a great question. I mean, again, I think that this is a question about who you are as a filmmaker and how you like to collaborate with folks. I think more often than not, a really healthy post environment is one where everyone does have a fairly prescribed role, but there's not as much emphasis on hierarchy. I think traditionally that post has been a really hierarchical place in the film industry. You know, you think of sort of like in the traditional system, like someone beginning as an assistant editor and working their way up to junior editor, and then finally maybe getting to cut some scenes and then becoming an editor. I think that this is something that is more flexible in nonfiction, I think, than it is in fiction sometimes. And also something that you as the director or a producer have the ability to really shape. So I think that this is something that kind of comes from a department head, sort of above the line, top down approach to organizing your post department. If you are a director who really likes to have, you know, when you find ideas and meaning through really like engaged conversation, then you are going to want to lean really heavily on your post team. You're going to want to invite conversation and invite the assistant editor into those conversations, invite the post PA into those conversations, because chances are they have a perspective on your film that is both very deep, having spent sort of this really granular time with it, and that there's a reason that they're in the room with you or on the Zoom with you, right? They're interested in this topic. Maybe they have a personal connection to it. There is something really meaningful there. And so, you know, I think it's really about staying open to that, and then also understanding that post is specialized. And so big ideas might look like really specific ideas. You know, there may be an idea for like, we're not nailing this sound effect. We're just not finding the right resonance. And then, you know, the Foley artist has an idea that not only sort of brings you to the creative sort of resolution that you're seeking, but also kind of like maybe has a profound impact on the film and the way that sound is understood in the film. I hope that that helps answer that question. Let's see, more questions. I've been a document editor working with a director who can't see the story in the footage. How do you gracefully point out the story that the director can't see? That is a great question. Very challenging. I think, what's your relationship with the director? You know, is this a work for hire where you're kind of coming on through maybe a referral, or, you know, someone you know someone in common and you're just sort of trying to like find your rapport with that director? Or is this, you know, like your best friend from film school and you're working on a project together and they're not seeing it? That's going to determine really closely how you approach this conversation. I would say that there are a couple of different things you can do here. I mean, first of all, no director I've ever met likes to be told like you're wrong about what your film is about. So I think find the ways in which their vision for the film is resonating with you. This is the way I understand it. And then what are the ways in which you're sort of seeing those seams, where you're seeing kind of like the light get in through the cracks that they might not see in the same way, or they might not know how to fill those cracks in the same way. I would say that this is also some place where show don't tell can be really effective. I think, you know, not every director is going to respond to sort of, you know, maybe a verbal or written description of the ways in which you feel like their vision for the film is sort of short-sighted, but maybe you cut a couple of strategic scenes and you show it and you say, you know, I thought the way that you were approaching it has character A in this power position, but I actually see character B being really powerful in shaping this story. What if we explore, you know, sort of opening in their point of view, and then we get to character A a little bit later on. I think that showing an approach to this through, you know, it's a tremendous amount of work, but I think like these really sort of strategic approaches to cutting things, scenes, or sequences can communicate a lot. And, you know, the director might see it and say, you know, I see it now. Like I never thought of it that way, but like, let's explore that. Let's get into character B's point of view. But yeah, not always an easy conversation. Okay. We are first-time directors. We recently broke up with our editor, who is respected and has edited an Oscar shortlisted film after 15 weeks of editing, as we continually felt we weren't on the same page and we were disappointed and mystified by the cuts they sent. We spent a lot of time thinking about things we didn't like that were just part of the process and that would be improved in later stages. How do you judge when an editor, however accomplished, is just not right for your project, approach, subject matter, and when things feel wrong is just part of the process? That is a great question. I mean, first of all, I think that that is a disappointing experience to have, but a really important rite of passage. I think in nonfiction, it is particularly challenging to really find the sweet spot in that director-editor relationship, because not only is that relationship variable and changeable, but your film is as well. You know, you are collaborating together to write this film in the editing room. And so, as I said before, it's one of those extremely challenging, intense, close, and emotional relationships that you build in the course of filmmaking. The director-editor relationship, it can really feel like you're sort of, you know, in a marriage or sort of like co-parenting a creative discovery together. So I think that, you know, it's always a relationship that is going to produce a lot of feelings. How do you know when a partnership is not working? How do you know? I think you know. I really do think that it's something that's very impulsive, and that you start to have a certain genre of conversations around, you know, we're seeing things this way, you're seeing things that way. Are we able to sort of thread this needle? Like, can we come to common ground? And if you find that you're having the same conversations over and over again, it's a pretty good indication that it might not be working. Someone just wrote in the chat, you have to really trust your gut feeling. I couldn't agree more. I do think that, you know, like, there is prestige that someone can lend to a project if they are, you know, maybe if you're a first-time filmmaker and you're working with someone who is well known and respected in the community, that absolutely doesn't mean that they're the right editor for your project. And I think in some cases it can be, you know, it's great to have this name on your deck. It's great to be able to sort of make a comp to a film that this person has edited in the past. Maybe it's a film that you really admire and respect. It doesn't necessarily mean that on a sort of a personal and creative level that this is going to be a fit. I think if if you're sort of between the possibilities of working with a very established, respected editor who's just not in line with your vision, and working with someone who's maybe not as well known, you know, maybe even like a little bit rougher in terms of their experience, but they're really passionate and they're dedicated and they're committed to not only understanding, but evolving your vision for the film, you want to work with that second editor. It's a very close relationship. And so working with someone where you're constantly, you know, where your friction is not productive to the filmmaking at large, is going to be really frustrating and difficult. Okay, let's see. What are arenas for knowledge sharing, community building, and networking within the documentary post-production world? Industry standards are changing rapidly, but workshops like this one today are so rare. I agree. I don't know a ton of resources for sort of community gathering and information sharing, specifically in post-production. I will say, you know, at a lot of people in the nonfiction world, you know, we all wear a lot of different hats. So I think that post-production is something that is maybe not like the sexiest thing to start talking about with someone when you're at a film festival or an event or, you know, a screening. But people in our community are passionate and knowledgeable about post-production. And so I think if you're going out in search of specific post knowledge, you can engage with people in this very sort of deliberate way through the channels that we use to engage with other filmmakers all of the time. I would also say that, you know, if you're going to screenings of particular films, maybe where, you know, the edit is getting a lot of buzz or the sound design is getting a lot of buzz, you know, go to those screenings, go see those films, and then talk to the people afterwards and and you will learn that. And someone just wrote in the chat, the D Word has weekly meets where you can ask questions, including discuss posts. That's fantastic. But yes, I mean, I really applaud organizations like the IDA for providing resources around all different aspects of filmmaking. And that is something that we need more of. I think we have time for one or two more questions. Let's see what we got. When funding is often so tied to production or post-production phase, do you have recommendations on how to fuse those stages more? That is a great question. I think it's something that in the sort of typical nonfiction funding cycle that sometimes as a filmmaker, you have to futz a little bit. I right now am producing a film where we're sort of exiting a development and production phase and trying to sort of go into a production and post phase where these things will all be happening simultaneously. And to be quite honest, post has already been underway for quite a while. I think that it is about sort of where are you in the filmmaking process where you can best communicate your intentions for the film. Even if you've begun editorial, even if you are sort of like producing assemblies and work samples, but you really still feel like you have a lot of production left. This is just something that is like going to, continue on simultaneously with these sort of two phases collapsed. I don't think that's uncommon at all, but it may at that point be advantageous to stick with more production oriented funding simply because you have a ways to go in terms of sort of evolving those conversations, sort of figuring out what the shape of post-production is going to be. And when you're applying for post-production funds, often a lot of organizations do really want sort of that accountability in terms of like, who are your collaborators? How are you going to be structuring this? And what does sort of the overall shape of post look like? And you may be engaged in post and still be figuring those things out. Okay. Okay, any suggestions for those of us who are doing the editing, color, audio stabilization, etc. ourselves because we have no budget and no friends or people who can donate services? I think that this is a really common and totally fine way to finish a film. I would say my advice first would be pace yourself. You are doing like 10 different people's jobs, probably on one laptop and in one person's energy. Not all of these things are going to be achieved simultaneously. I still recommend sort of creating a timeline and post workflow for yourself that allows you to approach each one of these things sort of, obviously always thinking about everything in an integrated way, but really being able to sort of shift into different modes because you're going to feel messy if you are doing everything at the same moment. And I think there are also parts of this workflow that necessitate sort of a much more sort of step-by-step sort of path of this. I mean, for example, whenever you can, do your sound mix as the absolute last thing. Your picture is fully locked, your colors in place, your graphics, your VFX, everything is there. The sound mix is kind of like the icing on your cake that's going to pull everything together and sort of bring it to its fullest realization creatively. And then, there are other, I would say, like pieces of advice that you can seek out, as you're thinking about your particular film and sort of what an ideal workflow looks like, even if you are the person executing all of these things yourself creatively and technically, you want to sort of structure it in such a way where it doesn't feel like you just have so many windows open in your computer that you can't see the forest for the trees. And I also will echo what someone put in the chat, which is back up often, early and often, backing up all the time. You are your own best friend as when you shift into assistant editor mode and can take that time to get things organized, clear in terms of your workflow, and also back everything up. Okay, do you have time for one more question? Let's see. Let's see. Oh, these are really great questions. What is the length of editing time you generally estimate for a 60 or 90-minute documentary it will take to reach picture lock? I know this is my answer to everything, but again, it depends. So I would say this depends on the nature of the film. This is something where, you sort of have a discrete production period. Maybe you've traveled somewhere to shoot, conduct interviews, what have you, and now you're sort of moving the footage into post. That's one story. But if it's something where it's going to be sort of more integrated throughout, it's really hard to sort of say what the discrete editorial period should be. In my sample budget for Untitled Bread Making documentary, I have budgeted 12 weeks, which is when I am thinking about, let's say a documentary where you're going into post with production sort of, you've shot all your principal photography. Let's say that you have a pretty good sense of what the flow of the film is going to be like. You have like a very detailed outline or a script. I would say that 12 weeks is probably sort of the minimum for getting to a festival cut of a documentary of this size. But of course, it depends on so many things. Are you editing it yourself? Are you doing other things while you're editing it? Does your editor, have full-time access, or are they sort of moonlighting on this project? I would quote my 8th grade history teacher when we would ask, how long does our essay need to be? He would say it should be as long as a dog's legs, long enough to get you where you need to go. So I don't really know what that means, but I think it means that the project and the topic will really help dictate the time that you need. But it, again, depends on sort of what that collaboration looks like, and also how much new ideas and material you are bringing into the project as post evolves. Okay. Let's see. Am I out of time, or do I have time for one more question?
I think you have time for a quick question.
A quick question. Okay, I'll answer the same question in terms of color grading. So how much time color grading a 60 or 90-minute documentary? I would say that that's actually a little bit easier to answer. The sort of typical ideal amount of time you want for a color grade for a 90-minute feature is about 40 hours. So, sitting in a color stage for about a week with a colorist. But again, if you have a lot of archives, that can represent more time in color. You are trying to create sort of a cohesive world with your archives that may represent a deeper investment of color time. Again, visual effects, you're going to give it a little bit more time. Or maybe you have something that's like shot in all one location, super straightforward. The lighting is all fairly consistent throughout. You may be able to get away with much less time in color. But that's, I think, like a good guiding principle. All right.
Thank you so much, Maya. That was an amazing, informative, wonderful session. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. What was I going to say? Oh, I wanted to say, one thing we like to do is take a screenshot of all of our attendees at the end of all of our workshops. So for those of you who want to turn on your cameras, I'm going to take a few screenshots so that we have a view of all of your beautiful faces. And it'll take a second, so just hold tight.
All right.
All right. Okay. Smile. All right. One more. All right. Thank you, everybody. Some little wrap-up notes. Thank you again to our access providers, Darcy and Heidi and Maggie. We strive to make all of our events as accessible as possible, and we would not be able to do so without you. Thank you to Abby for helping moderate the chat and running the technical side of things. And thank you to Maya. That was really great. I loved your presentation. Everything, as has been repeated in the chat, everything will be posted online and sent to the registrants, from the budget templates to the recording of this video, the chat download, and some other things. So thank you all so much. I don't know, Abby, Maya, do you have any last minute things you'd like to add at the end?
Just thanks so much. Thank you, Gabriella, Abby. Thank you to the access providers, and thanks everyone for coming. This was really fun and your questions were great.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, thank you.
Bye.